Welcome, brothers and sisters, to 1984 Law, and today we consider the question, is promotion to the inner party possible for both outer party members and proles? You may be a little puzzled at the inclusion of proles in our thoughts here, however this does have a law answer that I will touch upon too. So for those who are not overly familiar with the world of George Orwell's 1984, why even ask this question? Is it that difficult to advance into either branch of the party? To cut a long story short for our overarching question, yes, in principle, it's possible to advance through the classes of the world. However, this is unlikely and dangerous. The inner party, of course, are the elite ruling class of Oceania, the vast superstate that exists and is at perpetual war with the other superpowers, Eurasia and Eastasia. Comprising just 2% of the oceanic people, these men and women are the directing brains of the state, which in itself tells us a lot. They roughly correspond to the upper class, though by their own admission for O'Brien, they exist for the sole end of absolute power, manifested in total control over people like Winston Smith. They exercise power over people and resources for the sake of that power, which itself provides a good indication as to why advancement is so difficult in the world. Officially, according to Goldstein's book, advancement into either branch of the party is through examination at the age of 16. I believe it's likely that certain criteria must be met for consideration based on other relevant information too. Weaklings are said to be excluded from the inner party to ensure its robustness in maintaining its power and position as the ruling class, which to me opens up a more nuanced criteria for entry. Intelligence is obviously a given, which may involve an IQ or other standardized intelligence test. I also believe the examination probably tests other things too, such as ambition, commitment to orthodoxy and Big Brother, as well as a psychological test to determine a candidate's suitability in terms of ruling and exercising their power. The last of these criteria is possibly as important as the intelligence criterion in my opinion. If one does not have the stomach or urge to torture, to dominate, and also to coldly exert their personal and the party's collective will over both the faceless masses as well as the wailing and broken heretics that will inevitably be brought before them, then they cannot be allowed entry into the inner party. I believe this is primarily what this weakling label is directed at. Taking these broad criteria then, firstly intelligence, secondly ambition, thirdly loyalty, that is orthodoxy and devotion to BB, and finally psychological, these in itself exclude the vast majority of people from entry. Taking O'Brien as a natural model, we can see that he fulfills all of these criteria, with perhaps the second being more tempered or uncertain, given we never know what his exact position is within the party. O'Brien is exceptionally intelligent, certainly loyal and devoted to Big Brother, and is certainly psychologically suited to exercising his and the inner party's collective power over heretics like Winston. Winston suspects O'Brien was always nearby during his time in the Ministry of Love, meaning he had zero problem with directing the prolonged torture and breaking of Winston, possibly over several months, and even directly inflicted pain and psychological torment on Winston himself. If we honestly consider this then, how many individuals really exhibit these traits? I believe that this is why, though possible in principle, across the vast territory of Oceania, very few outer party members or children advance into the inner party. I number these in the hundreds at most, but more probably in the double digits. That's double digits out of a pool of millions. This makes sense given that Goldstein's book, which O'Brien claims to have authored and maintains is true as description, states that if anything, social advancement is more difficult even than it was in pre-industrial times, which were very stringent in their own right. This supports the theory that advancement between branches of the party is rare. I furthermore believe that the vast majority, if not all of these promotions, are through the examination route at 16. Another thing to remember too is that Goldstein's book implies that total numbers of Oceania's ruling class are also capped. The word used is limited, which likely means that even if there is a crop of suitable individuals in any given year, if inner party numbers don't require replenishment, these individuals simply become threats rather than potential allies. Is it possible then for post-16-year-old outer party members to advance into the inner party? Well, the law implies no. I suspect that earlier in the party's history, before the system was properly cemented, that there were examples of meteoric rises into what would become the inner party. However, once established and self-aware of what exactly it existed for, and how the so-called high in a society maintains its power, I don't believe the admission of fully grown and potentially corrupted adult outer party members would have been tolerated. A good, if somewhat controversial example in my opinion is of course Syme. A popular fan theory is that Syme, Winston's friend and newspeak expert, was not vaporized as Winston suspected, but was instead promoted into the inner party, despite being similar in age to Winston. This is a bit odd, as intelligence is generally regarded as genetic, and so Syme would have likely manifested this before 16. Syme is very intelligent, according to Winston, and is even praised by O'Brien himself as an expert in his field, so it's safe to assume he would have aced an intelligence test. Syme, interestingly too, fulfills the other criteria from before. Winston himself states you could never call him unorthodox. Syme was devoted to Big Brother and the principles of INGSOC. He also, at least superficially, appears suited psychologically for inner party membership, reveling in the details of the hangings and always telling stories of the hunting down of thought criminals. The only missing element with this character, which is not overtly obvious, is ambition. However, assuming Syme was ambitious too, and that, having fulfilled all the criteria, he also took the examination at 16, the numbers restriction is a reasonable explanation as to why Syme was not promoted. He was a fine candidate, but simply not needed at the time. This simply led to him appearing as a potential threat, one which Winston believes was eliminated. This number cap is likely the primary reason, along with the small pool of viable candidates to begin with, that very few outer party members rise into the inner party's ranks. Though Goldstein's book does state that the children of inner party parents are not, in principle, guaranteed membership, I do personally find it hard to believe that a natural nepotism does not ensure that most of these kids are permitted entry, assuming inner party parents nurture their offspring to the extent that they fulfill a minimum standard for entry. Simple replacement rates alone would restrict open slots to entry into the inner party. Indeed, if the average inner party parents have more than 2 kids, the trend would likely be the reverse, with a need to brutally cull total numbers by demoting less promising children into the outer party. Of course, I assume here that the number of 6 million were given, or around 2% of the population, pertains to full adult members and does not include their children, though I do believe that a certain amount of natural nepotism must exist here, as the inner party collective are, after all, still human beings, and will naturally want to ensure that their offspring succeed to their own powers and privileges. This does have its limits, as is indicated in Goldstein's book. The party is, after all, not concerned with perpetuating its blood, but its doctrine. Who wields power is not as important as the maintenance of the system that enables that power to begin with. Given this ultimate aim, such natural nepotism does have its limits and may be a common reason for vaporizations within the inner party. Perhaps the occasional inner party member, like Withers, is eliminated to allow for the entry of a party higher-up's son or daughter. It's interesting to speculate anyway. Despite all of this, however, these rules and restrictions are not ironclad. Given the overriding need to maintain the collective itself and its culture and doctrine, If somehow the inner party were to be severely depleted, then the survivors would be willing to admit an entire new generation drawn from the proles. So though vanishingly unlikely, given a desperate situation, it's actually still possible for a humble, if suitable prole to be admitted to the inner party's ranks. Outside of this unlikely situation, proles are generally not permitted to rise into either branch of the party. Indeed, Goldstein's book coldly states that, quote, proletarians in practice are not allowed to graduate into the party. The most gifted among them, who might possibly become nuclei of discontent, are simply marked down by the thought police and eliminated. This general policy of culling over promotion further reinforces my own belief that the same approach is taken a level up. Just as gifted proles are not permitted entry into the party and are rather eliminated, so too are intelligent and ambitious outer party members simply marked down and eliminated too, as we noted with Syme. This brings us to the final reason why post-16 graduation into the inner party is likely vanishingly rare, if not impossible. Most intelligent outer party members are smart enough to know they are dangerously exposed if they stand out. In contrast to Syme, Winston Smith is intelligent too, O'Brien conceding later on that Winston's mind appeals to him, as it happens to resemble his own. Winston, however, does not make a fuss about advancing, if anything, wanting to avoid any outward signal of exceptionalism or abnormality. Assuming Winston is the norm for intelligent party members, and Syme, with his forthrightness, is the exception, then very few individuals are reckless enough to stand out to begin with. These men and women naturally knowing the likeliest result is vaporization rather than advancement. So those were my thoughts on the issue of promotion to the inner party. Firstly, the suitable pool of candidates is small to begin with. Secondly, the inner party restricts its numbers and has a natural bias towards retaining slots for their own children, and, consequently, any individuals who do exhibit the necessary qualities after 16 are simply viewed as threats and eliminated in the vast majority, if not all cases. But what do you think? Is promotion to the inner party easier than I think? Write your thoughts and objections in the comments section. Drop a like if this video was plus good, and consider subscribing too if double plus good. Thanks for listening, and remember, Big Brother is watching you.